Hello all, welcome to the video. Today we are going to see about cluster sampling method. I am Dr.M.Nithya, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, Dr. SNS Rajalakshmi College of Arts and Science. Let's see the topic, cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is defined as a sampling method where the researcher is create multiple cluster of people from the population where there are indicative the homogeneous characteristics and have the equal chance to being a part of the sample. Cluster sampling is a kind of probability sampling techniques where the researcher divided the population into the multiple groups for the research. So the researcher then select the random groups which simple random or systematic random sampling techniques for the data collection and unit of analysis. Let's we see the cluster sampling with an example. A researcher want to conduct a study to judge a performance of shop performance in the business education across the country. It is impossible to conduct a research study that involves in the students in every university. Instead, cluster sampling allows the researcher to club the universities from the each city into one cluster. This cluster then defined the students population in the country. Next, either using the simple random sampling or systematic random sampling and randomly picking the cluster for the research study. Subsequently, by using the simple or systematic sampling, the business from each of this selected cluster can be chosen on whom to conduct the research study. In this sampling techniques, the researcher analyzes the sample that consists of multiple sample parameters such as demographic, habits, background, or any other population attributes which may be focused on the conducting research. This method is usually conducted when the groups are similarly yet internally diverse from the statistical population. Instead of selecting the entire population, cluster sampling allows the researcher to collect the data by forgetting the data into the small, more productive groups. The cluster sampling again divided into the three smaller types, that is single stage cluster sampling, two stage cluster sampling, multi-stage cluster sampling. A single stage cluster sampling means, as the name suggested, sampling is done just once. An example, a single stage cluster sampling, an NGO wants to create a sample of girls across the neighboring town to provide the education. Using single stage sampling, the NGO randomly selected the town cluster from a sample and extended to help the girls education into the town. The next type is two-stage cluster sampling. Here, instead of selecting all elements of a cluster, only we have to take a handful of members are chosen from each group by implementing the systematic or simple random sampling. An example of two-stage cluster sampling: a business owner wants to explore the performance of his or her plants that are spread across the various parts of the country. The owner creates a cluster of plants, so he or she then select the random sample from the cluster to conduct the research. Multiple stage cluster sampling. For conducting effective research across the multiple geographics, one need to form a complicated cluster that can be achieved only using the multi-stage sampling techniques. For an example of multi-stage cluster sampling, an organization intended to analyze the performance of smartphones across the country. They can divide it into the entire country population into the cities cluster and select the cities with the highest population and also filter those who using the mobile phones. It is called as multi-stage cluster sampling. The advantages of cluster sampling: consume less time and cost, convenient access, data accuracy, easy to implement the research. Finally, you can implement the cluster sampling by dividing the targeted population into the cluster. Cluster means a small group. You can also select the random sample of this cluster to survey. Thank you for watching.